everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is November the 18th, 2021. I'm Barry Stagner, and hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Our annual, we had to skip last year because of all the stuff going on, but our annual prophecy conference, Proximity, is going to be taking place January 29th. Now, Calvary Chapel East Anaheim is going to host the event, and the event is sponsored and founded by Calvary Chapel Tustin, my home church. But they've graciously opened up their beautiful facility to accommodate plenty of people. So signups are underway, and you can go to I hope you're following me on Telegram. I just posted the link to the registration there. You can follow along there as well as we post stories relating to prophecy and the news there also, as well as other updates and information. And you can go to our website too, cctustin.org. And that's January 29th. Pastor Jack Hibbs, my good friend Amir Sarfati, and if you have met and heard the operations manager of Behold Israel, Pastor Mike Olay, you know that he is an outstanding speaker. He'll be joining us, and I'll be rounding out the four speakers, and then we'll have, as always, the Q&A. So again, that's Proximity 2022, and our theme this year is Holding Fast, and that will be at Calvary Chapel East Anaheim, and it will last from, I believe it's from 9 to 4:30-ish, somewhere around in there. So if you want to register in person, it will be streamed. That's always a question. We'll have various platforms streaming. East Anaheim will stream it on their church website. All the social media platforms, myself, as well as Behold Israel, will be streaming the day. So there'll be plenty of free access to the conference. But if you'd like to join us in person, there is a registration fee. We serve lunch so people don't have to leave the property. And I wish we had the resources to buy you lunch, but you're going to have to buy your own lunch. So there is a registration fee, which does help us offset the costs as well. So with that, go ahead and sign up or get ready and mark your calendars to join us and watch us online on January 29th, 2022 for Proximity 2022. So let's get started today. We've got an interesting group of stories, as we do every week. Lots going on in the world. The first story comes from the Times of Israel, and the headline reads, a new IAEA report says Iran has boosted stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Iran has increased its stockpile of its highly enriched uranium, defying commitments made under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal of 2015. And the Nuclear Watchdog Agency has actually reported this in their most recent report. Its estimate of Iran's stockpile as of November 6th was many times in excess the limit laid down in the 2015 agreement with world powers. And the total amount now includes 251 pounds enriched to 20%, up from 186 pounds in September, and 39 pounds enriched up to 60%, up from 22 pounds, the report says. And such highly enriched uranium can easily be refined to make atomic weapons, which is why world powers have sought to contain Tehran's nuclear program. The Vienna-based agency told members that it is still not able to verify Iran's exact stockpile of enriched uranium due to the limitations Tehran imposed on UN inspectors earlier this year. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean they can just pop this on a warhead and send it over to Israel. The enrichment level required for a weapons-grade uranium is 90%, so they've still got a ways to go. But there's also been a lot of recent stories that they've been packing in these new advanced centrifuges, which allow for a lot quicker separation of the U-235 from the U-238 and creating the fissile material that is able to create the atomic or nuclear weapon. And so their aspirations are clear because there is no use. Energy-related enriched uranium is at 20%. You don't need to go above that. Why would you spend the money to enrich beyond the point where it's energy use ready? Now, that's always their claim, is they have no aspirations for a nuclear weapon. So why do they have this, what was the number again here? The increase to the 251 pounds and 39 pounds of enriched up to 60%. Now, again, they've got to go up to 90% to put it into a weapons grade material and create their own atomic weapon. But 60% is a lot closer than 20%. And so as they keep enriching, and who knows, as the article even said, how much they actually have. Now, this is important prophetically in the sense that we realize that the Persians, listed in Ezekiel 38 and 39, as the one of the invading forces in the Ezekiel war scenario, are going to be destroyed along with the other nations that invade them. As the King James says, 5/6 of the armies will be laying dead on the mountains of Israel that invade when God strikes them with hailstones of fire mingled with blood. And so this is going to be obviously a catastrophic event that I believe happens, at least the end of the Ezekiel war happens during the tribulation. Certainly could and probably does start beforehand, the rapture somewhere in the midst of it. As so that is the description of an earthquake, hailstones of fire mingled with blood. That is the type of language that's exclusive to seasons of history where God is dealing directly with the enemies of Israel. We're still in the time of the Gentiles. So I believe the time of the Gentiles has to end for the Ezekiel war scenario to end in the way it does. And again, most certainly seems like it's going to start beforehand. But this is also important in realizing that two things are potential spokes on the wheel of this particular story. And that is one, the Damascus prophecy of Isaiah 17:1, and as well as the Ezekiel 38-39 war scenario. Because Israel has stated under no uncertain terms, both with the previous prime minister as well as Naftali Bennett, the current prime minister, that they will in no uncertain terms allow Iran to become nuclear. So this could potentially be an Israeli strike to deal with this, could very well be the trigger that leads to either the Damascus destruction or a strike on Iranian soil. And, the Iranians and their typical bloviating, the Iranian regime, that is, not the Iranian people, but the ideological regime there in power is, and has stated in the past that any action on Israel's part to hamper or hinder their nuclear program will be met in no uncertain terms with Israel's destruction. So, but this type of strong language is pretty typical of that regime. Now, another interesting story comes out of the Times of Israel, and that is an explosion reported at an oil pipeline in southern Iran creates tremors. An explosion was reported at an Iranian oil pipeline in the south of the country, according to media reports, and Reuters said, citing the semi-official Tasnim news agency, the explosion occurred because the infrastructure in the place is old and out of date. Now, Tasnim said the explosion created small tremors that could be felt in surrounding areas. In June, a massive fire broke out at the refinery serving Iran's capital, sending thick plumes of black smoke over Tehran. Last year, a series of mysterious blasts and explosions were reported at Iranian oil pipelines. Several of the explosions struck sensitive Iranian sites, leading to speculation that they could be part of a sabotage campaign engineered by Israel or another Tehranian foe. And while Iran has regularly accused Israel of attacks and cyber attacks on its infrastructure, Tehran in the past has also covered up such incidents and denied that they were the results of attacks by outside forces. Last month, Iranian gas stations were hit by widespread outages after a cyber attack rendered useless the government-issued electronic cards that many Iranians use to buy subsidized fuel at the pump. And Iran's head of civil defense later blamed Israel and the U.S. for the cyber attack. We are still unable to say forensically, but analytically, I believe it was carried out by the Zionist regime, the Americans, and their agents, a state representative said in a TV interview. So, again, this is typical Iranian posturing. This was because of outdated infrastructure and it's old and this and that. They're slow to recognize that the Israelis can get inside their back pocket, so to speak, and get that close to their facilities without them having any knowledge whatsoever. So it bodes better for the regime to just say, well, it was old and worn out. And that's what caused this, especially in light of all the other things that have gone on that were cited in that article. Did Israel do it? Well, I don't know, but they do. And very, very possible. So again, here you've got building tensions between the Persian invaders of Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Israel, if only in the accusatory stage right now, saber rattling, so to speak. Our next story comes directly out of Turkey from the Turkish newspaper, the Daily Sabah. And the headline reads Erdogan and Herzog discuss Turkey Israeli ties and regional issues. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Israel's President Isaac Herzog on Thursday discussed bilateral ties and regional issues in a phone call. Erdogan conveyed to his Israeli counterpart that relations between the two countries are important for security and stability in the Middle East, and that the differences of opinion can be minimized if there is mutual understanding on both bilateral and regional issues, according to a statement, emphasizing that it is essential to reestablish a culture of peace, tolerance, and coexistence in the region. Erdogan said that in this respect, the development of Palestinian and Israeli relations, and the resumption of the peace process are top priorities. He also noted that maintaining contact and dialogue between Turkey and Israel is in the common interest. According to a statement by the Israeli presidency, the phone call between Erdogan and Herzog was conducted in a positive spirit. And Herzog says he welcomes a comprehensive dialogue with Turkey on bilateral and regional issues related to peace, the statement said. I find this to be interesting because, here you've got Turkey, again, a major player. Multiple names in the Ezekiel war scenario are related to modern day Turkey. Geographic areas represented by the descendants of Noah listed there from Genesis chapter 10. And, here you've got Turkey saying, this is important. This is an important relationship. Well, before Erdogan came to power, the Israelis vacationed on the beaches of Turkey, enjoyed the beautiful boardwalk there along the beach, which I've been there myself. Turkey's a beautiful country, great place to vacation. Food's fabulous there. The seven churches of Revelation, including one of the most incredible archaeological sites in the world, I think paralleled only by Bet Shean in Israel. The ruins at Ephesus are there as well, and it's a wonderful place to visit. And Jews did that regularly and spent their vacations there until Erdogan came to power. And now he's saying, hey, our relationships are important, and you've got to deal with the issues that are important to us as well. And again, this is curious because you've got, Turkey, I believe they play more than just a secondary role in the Ezekiel war scenario. I believe they are the primary that brings this battle to pass and kind of leads the way. Erdogan has made no bones about the fact that he wants to reestablish a caliphate, a reestablishing of the former Ottoman Empire, the glory days of the Turkish Empire. And guess who he wants to be sultan? And that would be him, of course. So, but we've got these interesting overtures being made, which I think, like we mentioned in a story a few weeks ago about the Sudan considering an Abraham Accord type agreement with the Israelis. And because they are one of the invading nations in the Ezekiel war scenario, we mentioned at that point in time, this is going to have to turn around, and it already has. It doesn't matter why, doesn't matter the mechanics of it, but it has changed. And there was just a celebration of the Abraham Accords in New York City just a month or so ago, and Sudan did not send a representative to celebrate these peace agreements with the Israelis in the Middle East. So this too in Turkey is going to turn around. And yet we've got these olive branches being extended back and forth, this pleasant conversation that was held between the two presidents. And the Middle East Monitor is reporting that an Israeli couple detained in Turkey is released and returned home. Two Israelis detained last week in Turkey after they were reported for taking photos of the presidential palace in Istanbul were released and arrived in Israel on board a private jet sent by the Israeli government, local media reported this morning. Husband and wife Morty and Naftali Oknin were detained last week after taking photographs for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's palace. The couple photographed Erdogan's home. They focused on the house and marked it. Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said. He added the prosecutor's office believes that they committed a crime of military and political espionage, but the court will make the decision in the future. In a press release, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and his Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said after joint efforts with Turkey. Morty and Natalie Oknin were released from prison and are on their way home to Israel. After their arrival home, the couple thanked officials. Now, this is pretty interesting story. Taking a picture of the president's house is espionage. Well, if that happened here in the United States, there'd be hundreds of thousands, millions of people in prison. And again, the fact that they're Jewish, that created, I believe, the investigation and the interest in this couple. And again, taking pictures of Erdogan's home where everybody knows where it is, and Israeli intelligence is certainly beyond the place of needing to disguise a couple of people as tourists, send them in with a camera to take pictures. That's slow last year, so to speak, as the saying would go. Now, our next story comes from the Middle East Monitor as well, and this is interesting. Kind of gives a general attitude of much of the European community and the world, where the headline reads, UK's Prince Charles says Jordan guardianship over Jerusalem vital for peace. Can you imagine another country saying, France really needs to have charge of London for there really to be peace and prosperity in the region? Yet, Britain's Prince Charles said yesterday that Jordan's custodianship over Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem is vital to achieving peace in the Middle East. The UK views Jordan, under the leadership of King Abdullah II, not only as a friend, but as a consistent voice of moderation and tolerance, as was the case during the reign of the late King Hussein bin Talal. Prince Charles said during a visit to the Jordan Museum in the capital of Amman, accompanied by his wife Camilla. He added that the relationship between the two kingdoms has developed over 100 years, despite all the challenges that existed during that period, into a close relationship embodied in cooperation between the two governments and the remarkable warmth between the two peoples. Prince Charles emphasized King Abdullah's role as custodian of the Christian and Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem as a vital element in the search for peace in the region. Well, according to Jordan's oversight, Christians cannot pray there, Jews cannot pray there, only Muslims can pray there, and it's a holy site in another country of which Jordan has no authority whatsoever. And so this is just, again, I'm always fascinated by these kinds of statements when other countries, including the United States, make statements regarding sovereignty over another nation and telling them how they ought to conduct their business. And, this is, again, I think just kind of pitching basically what the rest of Europe sees with the situation in Israel. And we have to remember there is going to be a revived Roman Empire, a geographic region that includes areas within the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, when it was at its zenith, and as well as other areas, because we do know from the statue in Daniel chapter 2 that it isn't going to be just the iron legs represented in this final 10-nation confederation. There will be other nations involved. But again, this is kind of the general attitude from one of the big players within the European community that Jordan needs to remain in control of the most sacred site to the Jews, and a site that is unmentioned in the Quran and has nothing to do with Islam whatsoever, except for the fact that Islam, or the Quran, says that it belongs to the descendants of Moses, the Jews. Now, our next story comes from Reuters, and the headline reads, U.S. says Iran-backed hackers launching disruptive cyber attacks on American firms. And a hacking group sponsored by Iran's government is launching disruptive cyber attacks against a wide range of U.S. companies, including healthcare providers and transportation firms, according to a cybersecurity alert that was released and published on the U.S. Homeland Security website. The warning, jointly authored by FBI and DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agencies, said the hackers were exploiting old software vulnerabilities in products made by Microsoft and Fortinet to break into the victim computer networks. While the vulnerabilities were patched, some customers haven't updated their networks On Tuesday, Microsoft said in a blog post that it had observed 6 different Iranian hacking groups deploying ransomware since September of 2020. If you're not familiar with what ransomware is, they put a bug in your computer or your computer system that controls a massive number of other computers, and they hack it basically and demand that you pay a ransom, and then they'll give you the solution, the software to basically unravel what it is that they placed in your system. So it's all about money. It's an extortion payment in essence. And that's what the article says. It typically ransomware functions by encrypting a computer's data, leaving it inaccessible until the extortion payment is made to the hackers. And this is what the Iranians are trying to do. So this just reminds us that, during the tribulation period, technology, at least for a season, is certainly going to play a major part. It seems to me that during the tribulation, because some of the events that take place there is going to be a disruption in the world's electrical system, including cyber systems around the world, because we've got records of horseback invasions and very archaic type weaponry being mentioned there, even within the Ezekiel war scenario, the shields and bucklers and horsemen and things of that nature. And we've got other mentions of such language in the book of Revelation. But we've also got, like in Revelation chapter 11, where the 2 witnesses lie in the streets dead and the whole world rejoices. Now, this is obviously satellite technology being put into play that allows the world to watch them die, to watch them lie in the streets, and to celebrate for 3 days the death of the 2 witnesses, and also to watch in horror them ascend and go into heaven right before their eyes. So, but this also points out the fact that this type of thing is going to come into play most likely with the mark of the beast as well. I mean, if you think about it, here you're going to have hopefully hundreds of millions or maybe even over 1 billion people who suddenly disappear in a moment and a twinkling of an eye when Jesus tells the angel to sound and go get the church, and he'll meet them in the air along with the dead in Christ. And, you've got obviously some interesting things that are going to take place after that. If we think that identity theft is bad now, just wait till there's millions of pieces of property as well as personal property, not just land, but also cars and bank accounts. And, identity theft is going to be rampant. So, somebody's going to have to come up with a system where we can track this and monitor people. Maybe a mark on the hand or forehead would be an idea that they'll come up with. I'm being facetious, obviously. The New York Times says standoff over vaccines between Oklahoma governor and the Pentagon intensifies. A standoff between the governor of Oklahoma and the Pentagon over the jab mandate for troops has turned into a stormy test of federal power as President Joe Biden moves to require jabs for a broad swath of the American workforce. Oklahoma's newly appointed Adjutant General for the National Guard, Brigadier General Thomas H. Mancino, announced last week on behalf of Governor Kevin Stitt that guardsmen in the state would not be required to get the jab. The policy defies a Pentagon directive issued in August that makes the jab mandatory for all groups, including the National Guard, by deadlines set by each service branch. The order I issued came directly from the governor. It is a lawful order to the men and women of the Oklahoma National Guard, Mancino said in an interview, adding that he indeed had taken the jab himself. Pentagon officials said Wednesday that failure to follow valid medical readiness requirements could jeopardize the status of service members who could face dismissal or other punishment. Now get this. What the Pentagon just said is disobey your commanding officer and do what we say instead. Again, the level of authoritarianism is rising higher and higher and becoming more and more clear that Washington wants to take control of all of our decisions and mandate to everyone at every level of society what it is they have to do that is according to their determinations. Now, the officials insist that Stitt has no legal standing, although experts on the obscure laws governing the National Guard disagree. They note that unless National Guard members are federally deployed, they are under the jurisdiction of the governor of the state and therefore not subject to federal mandates. And that's something we all have to remember, especially here in the United States. If you're watching from there, that the states have a lot more power than the Fed. And government overreach can easily be slapped down in some areas by individual governors. And, this is all 50 states, I believe, or all appeals courts have had cases filed against this mandate that has come from President Biden. The Pentagon, however, the article says, is not without redress. It could deny funding to state units or impede the promotions of Guard members who refuse to be jabbed. Officials said Wednesday that Guard members who refuse a jab could also face dismissal, as with active duty troops. So again, the Pentagon is telling these soldiers, don't obey your commanding officers because they work for the governor. And the governor is kind of like the commander-in-chief of U.S., commander-in-chief of all U.S. armed forces. Well, the governor's in charge of the troops within his own state. Now, the Epoch Times says, conservative majority court chosen to decide on Biden's private employer jab mandate. An appeals court dominated by Republican-nominated judges was chosen at random Tuesday to deal with the flurry of lawsuits against the Biden administration's private business jab mandate. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit was the winner of a lottery that was triggered by multiple appeals courts receiving challenges to the mandate, which was promulgated at the behest of President Joe Biden and would affect every business with 100 or more workers if it's allowed to take effect. 34 petitions for review or suits were filed against the mandate. At least, this is what we mentioned a moment ago, one petition was filed in every single court of appeals in the nation. And federal law says the challenges to a rule in multiple appeals courts shall lead to a lottery from which one court is picked, and then that court handles the cases which are consolidated. The Sixth Circuit Court oversees circuit, not circus, oversees Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee. Active and senior judges include 6 nominees of former President 45, 8 nominees of former President George Bush, 3 nominees of George H.W. Bush, 3 from Reagan, 5 nominees from Clinton, 2 from Barack Obama. That means 20 of the 27 judges were nominated by Republican presidents. It's not good news for Biden, said Lawrence Gostin, director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law, as he wrote on Twitter. A Sixth Circuit panel will decide whether to keep in place the stay of the mandate that was ordered on November 6th by 3 Republican-nominated judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. The judges said the mandate raised grave statutory and constitutional issues. Now, this has probably been the most single discussed issue at our church, and I'm sure many others, and in multitudes of homes across the country. What do we do? We're concerned about taking this, and we don't want to be forced to do this. Constitutional rights and, parental rights. And we have to remember that God gave parents charge over children, not the government, and not the schools either. The parents are the ones responsible to train up their children in the way that they should go. Parents are the ones responsible for making health decisions over their children, not the government and not a school board or any other low-level official. So this is a major issue that is being discussed in many homes and people worried about losing their jobs. And let me just say this to any of you who may be watching who are in that category. This is good news, potentially great news, because if this court decides that the Fifth Circuit's decision, the injunction, is permanent, then that's it, and it can't happen. And most likely that means it goes in front of SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's going to take some time, obviously. But hopefully this is a respite, and hopefully it's a permanent solution to this, because the Supreme Court hopefully would actually read the Constitution as they claim to uphold and interpret, and because this is unconstitutional beyond imagination. So, excuse me. The Epoch Times says OSHA suspends enforcement of vaccine mandate after court block. What happened on November 6th with the U.S. Circuit Court caused OSHA who was the one who was given charge in this mandate to enforce this the jab mandate for private businesses. And OSHA said, well, we're just going to pull back and wait and see what the court system does. Now, here's another interesting story. Let me just throw this out there for your information, because we've been trying to keep our church updated. My wife and I both had COVID. I was diagnosed or tested positive on the first day of the year. Hello, Happy New Year. And my wife had it a few days after me, and our daughter got it too. And I think pretty much everybody in our family has had it. But with all of the misinformation out there, of all the conflicting reports that we see, including the ones coming out of the single source of the CDC, we have taken, since this, we have taken every 60 days. First of all, it was just a qualitative antibody test, either yes or no, we have them. And now for the last three 60-day cycles, we've been taking quantitative to see how many antibodies we have. And the report that we get comes back and says, nobody really knows what this means, other than the fact that you have this many antibodies already or continuing to be active in your system. We just tested yesterday. This morning when I got up, we already got our results from LabCorp, and my wife and I still, after 11 months, have strong antibodies against COVID. And we've watched them very gradually decline. There's another article that just came out today and said, any of the jabs use their efficacy lose it, I should say, in 60 days. So here we are with strong antibodies 11 months later. We took no jab. What God built in us, the system to build antibodies, seems to be functioning quite well, thank you. And we still have strong resistance to that. And that's why I mentioned in the past few weeks, I've been around thousands and thousands of people over these past 11 months. And we've not gotten it again. And interesting, this next article, because the Epoch Times is reporting that the CDC says there is no record of naturally immune people transmitting COVID-19. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention says it has no record of people who are naturally immune transmitting the virus that causes COVID-19. In the fall, the CDC received a request from an attorney on behalf of the Informed Consent Action Network for documents reflecting any documented case of an individual who, one, never received the jab, and two, was infected with COVID-19 once, that recovered and then later became infected again, and three, transmitted COVID-19 to another person when reinfected. People who have recovered from COVID-19 are also known to carry some degree of natural immunity to the virus, like I just said. In response, dated November 5th, that's just 13 days ago, in a response dated November 5th, made public recently, the CDC said it doesn't have any documentation pertaining to those requests. The CDC confirmed to the Epoch Times that its Emergency Operations Center didn't find any records responsive or related to that request. You would assume that if the CDC was going to crush the civil and individual rights of those with natural immunity by having them expelled from school, fired from their jobs, separated from their families, or from the military rather, and worse, the CDC would have proof of at least an instance of an unvaccinated, naturally immune individual transmitting the COVID-19 virus to another individual. If you thought this, you'd be wrong. According to Aaron Siri, the attorney who sought the records on behalf of the network, he mentioned in a blog post. The CDC's disclosure drew responses from several medical experts, including Johns Hopkins' Dr. Marty Makary, who said it underlined how little data the agency has released concerning the recovered. Makary called on the CDC to make data on any reinfections that have resulted in hospitalization or death public, including information on patients' comorbidities or the lack thereof. And again, there are reports after reports after reports that are out there, and I didn't want to beat this thing to death today, but I can't even tell you how many stories there are of the percentage of people who've gotten the jab who are in the hospital with COVID. And again, for me, God has fearfully and wonderfully made us, and we don't be foolish in times such as these. Just like, when you're around somebody that's got the flu, you stay away from them, you keep your distance. You don't social distance, you smart distance, so you don't get it. And you don't touch things, you wash them completely that they have touched. I mean, come on, it's just common sense. And, God has put within us a system that works wonderfully. And yes, we don't deny that people are dying from COVID, but they're dying from the flu too, and always have. So, again, we just need to be smart and we'll get through this. Axios says, now there's another story. I didn't include it, but just let me tell you what the headline said. It said that eating disorder hospitalizations are at a record level during the pandemic. And Axios says drug overdose deaths top 100,000 for the very first time. An estimated 100,306 people in the U.S. died from a drug overdose in the 12-month period ending April 2021, according to a new provisional data released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Wednesday. Why it matters? It's the first time drug overdose fatalities reached six figures in a 12-month period and signals that the country is on track to set another tragic milestone after reporting a record 93,331 deaths in 2020, drug deaths in 2020. The data represented is incomplete, as many cases require more investigating to confirm the cause of death, though the agency's estimates largely differ from the final totals. And what they're saying is, as we continue to make strides to defeat the pandemic, we cannot overlook this epidemic of loss, which has touched families and communities across the country. Now, again, when you're not able to work, when you're not able to feed your family, when all of these things are being manifested in your life, a lot of people, especially people who don't know the Lord, lean on self-medicating and just to escape the pressures just for a moment through drugs. And the article concludes with saying, or alcohol for that matter, greater prevalence of synthetic opioids, specifically fentanyl, and the social and economic disruption set off by the pandemic are widely believed to be the cause of increased death. Now you add the eating disorders, these things aggravating or triggering things that people are struggling with already. And again, these pressures keep coming. It just seems like, they've already changed the definition of fully vaccinated from, getting 1 to 2. And now you have to have the booster as well to be defined as fully vaccinated. There are countries around the world that if you don't have the booster, the card that you have, the interactive card that you have with a QR code on it, is deactivated until you get your third shot and all these things. And yet here you've got those who have the jab filling up hospitals, and they're numbering with cases just in incredible percentages. Now, here's another story I think that should alarm us all. Comes from the Washington Examiner. Florida parents sue school for secretly transitioning their 13-year-old daughter. Parents of a 13-year-old daughter have filed a federal lawsuit against the Florida school district after officials at Deer Lake Middle School secretly transitioned her into a transgender male, or a biological girl who says she wants to live as a boy, including allowing her to use male spaces like bathrooms and choosing her own pronouns. Again, the school's taking charge of parenting. Jeffrey and January Littlejohn's daughter, who is referred to as AG in court filings, did talk about her gender confusion with her mother, who holds a master's degree in counseling from Florida State University. January spoke at a gathering of the Florida Family Policy Council about the school withholding from her and her husband what the school did without their knowledge or permission. So when our daughter told us she was experienced to stress about her gender at the height of the pandemic, we were completely caught by surprise. She had expressed no signs of gender confusion or distress in early childhood or leading up even to this announcement. So we were trying our best to navigate these uncharted waters and support her in the best way we could and help her through her feelings, January Littlejohn said. We found a counselor, started our own research, which led us to gender ideology. But when the little Johns learned about the truth about what the school did, they were both shocked and outraged. The Washington Examiner reported on the lawsuit, stating that the Little Johns informed their daughter's math teacher, Rima Kelly, about the teenager's gender dysphoria and continued treatment with a mental health counselor on August 27, 2020. Kelly offered to inform the school about their daughter's desire to identify as non binary, which the parents declined. They told the teacher not to do it, in other words. The teacher is not a named defendant in the case. However, a couple of weeks later, on September 14th, while she was getting into the car, the little John's daughter mentioned that the school had asked her which bathroom she wanted to use, which the lawsuit says she thought was funny. January, Little John told the Examiner that this was the first time they became aware that the school was meeting with their daughter and assisting the teenager in embracing a different gender identity in school settings. The school did not facilitate any transition-related medical procedures. The school claimed the child needed to authorize for her parents to be at the meeting. Did you hear that? The school said the child needed to authorize for her parents to be at the meeting. Absolutely incredible. Aren't you glad God is a merciful God? He is patient, long suffering, and I just can't imagine that there's any reason that this is continuing other than he still has some to save during the time of the Gentiles. But he'll do a lot more saving during the tribulation as well. Just amazing to see the responsibility of parents just completely disregarded, as are the instructions of a parent disregarded by a teacher, and the school telling the kid you can authorize or refuse for your parents to be at the meeting. Man, just incredible. Well, tonight, depending on where you're at in the country and world, physics.org says the longest lunar eclipse in centuries will happen this week. Now, let me just preface this story by saying this. This doesn't have a direct prophetic correlation other than there's going to be anomalies in the cosmos during the tribulation period, and signs in the heavens is the way the Bible puts it. And so we're seeing, as we've been talking about these asteroids that have been blown by between the Earth and the moon of late. And I'll mention to you, if you didn't happen to catch the past couple of weeks, the closest passing asteroids in recorded history, the top 3, have all been recorded since August of this year. And then I mentioned that last Monday, there were 3 asteroids that passed between the Earth and the moon on Monday afternoon. You know when they spotted them? Monday morning. And now here we've got the longest lunar eclipse in centuries happening, actually lasting from November 18th today to Friday, November 19th. The moon will be so close, NASA said, to the opposite of the sun on November 19th that it will pass through the southern part of the shadow of the Earth for a near totally lunar eclipse. This, again, is from NASA's website, physics.org, reporting on the story. The eclipse will last 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 23 seconds, making it the longest in centuries, and this reported by space.com. Only a small sliver of the moon will be visible during the eclipse. About 97% of the moon will disappear into the Earth's shadow as the sun and moon pass opposite sides of the planet. The moon should appear to be reddish-brown in color as it slips into the shadows, according to NASA, and the eclipse will be visible in many parts of the world, including North America, Eastern Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, according to Earth Sky. For U.S. East Coast observers, it's probably going on as we're doing this. The partial eclipse begins a little after 2 a.m., reaching the maximum at 4 in the morning. If you want to get up and watch it, I'm sorry, I thought that was a 9, and that was a 2. I have a supersized font on my iPad here because I don't wear my glasses to do this. But anyway, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. East Coast time. West Coast, that translates to just after 11, with the maximum being at 1 a.m. So again, not saying that, this eclipse is a sign. We just went through that not too long ago. And listen, the prophecies in Joel have a coordinated event that happened with the the moon turning into blood and the sun turning black as sackcloth. So those are simultaneous events, and they are generated by something that happens on and to the earth. It's not an eclipse. It's something that throws so much dust into the atmosphere that the sun and the moon are darkened. And again, an eclipse is just, a normal recurring event throughout history. There's nothing supernatural about it. But, the one reason I want to throw this out there is because this eclipse is the longest one in hundreds of years. And pair that with the other atmospheric type of events we've been mentioning. I just thought I'd throw it in there. And if you want to get up and check it out, it'll be a great thing to see. Now, Watchers is reporting that natural gas prices in Europe are soaring as Germany suspends approval for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Natural gas prices in Europe soared again Tuesday on November 16, 2021, as German Federal Network Agency suspended the process of certifying the new Russian gas pipeline called Nord Stream 2. The pipeline was completed in September 2021, was designed to bypass Ukraine and connect Russia directly to Germany. With about 40% of natural gas in the EU coming from Russia, leading energy traders have warned of the risk of rolling blackouts in Europe in the event of a colder than average winter. In a statement issued today, this guy's name, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. It's like 6 syllables long, and they got consonants next to each other that in English ought not to be. But anyway, he said it would be only possible to certify an operator of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if that operator was organized in a legal form under German law. Nord Stream 2, which is based in Zug, Switzerland, has decided not to transform its existing legal form, but instead to found a subsidiary under German law to solely govern the German part of the pipeline, the agency said in a statement. So again, we're talking about all the things going on, with Israel and with these other nations and the European connection and all that. We have to remember the Ezekiel invasion is economically motivated, at least for some, because of the nations who protest the invasion, those being the Arab Gulf states, asking, what are you doing? Are you coming to plunder or take booty? And obviously there's economic association with it, most likely connected to energy-related products, upon which Russia relies heavily to feed their military and their economy. Now, another interesting story, we're kind of jumping around here a little bit, and this again comes from Watchers. And, there's some of the stories we've been hearing, and I reported, I think it was on Telegram a few weeks ago, that there was a story that read that, it's going to take more than rain to end the drought, which when I posted it, I said that's a candidate for the stupidest statement ever made by the media. And a drought is the absence of rain. How do you end a drought? It rains. And there's been language coming out of the Pacific Northwest about this catastrophic drought and all. And, again, for me, this is just so important for us to understand, that there are cycles in the weather. There's seasons where the surface temperature of the earth increases, and there are seasons, and I'm talking seasons, potentially hundreds of years or half a millennial or longer, where it's hotter and then it gets cooler for a while. And now here we've had this language that has been coming out of the media in the U.S., about, this drought's so bad, not even rain can fix it. Well, look at this. Atmospheric river hits British Columbia, causing major floods and landslides in Canada. It's not just there. It's in the Northwest, the Great Northwest, Pacific Northwest of the U.S. as well. Another round of heavy rain caused by atmospheric river caused major flooding and landslides in southern British Columbia, Canada, and parts of Washington and Oregon in the U.S. on November 14 and 15 of 2021. Some parts of the region received nearly 10 inches of rain. At least 106,000 customers lost power in BC and another 140,000 in neighboring Washington state. And the worst affected was BC, where rivers overflowed. Authorities were forced to close roads and bridges. As many as 100 vehicles were trapped between the two landslides on Highway 7 a scenic route running east of Vancouver. The entire area was then evacuated before rescue operations halted Monday night. There are 275 people trapped on BC Highway 7, Alana Kelly of Glacier Media reported, and people stuck there tell me they've done a head count and a helicopter is being organized to possibly evacuate them out. They tell me everyone is in good spirits and are thankful for technology. The atmospheric river event caused extensive damage and many landslides, said Dr. Dave Petley of landslideblog.com. The figure will not become clear until later this week, but the levels of damage to the road network look to be high in places. So again, here we've had this typical hyperbole from the media, worst ever. Never, we just may as well throw in the towel. The drought's just going to impact us. This will never reverse. All the other things, ridiculous things the media has been reported, and now here we go with catastrophic flooding. Now, here's another story that's super interesting, and it comes from the Associated French Press. New World Order. Asia's virtual influencers offer metaverse glimpse. Sporting neon hair and flawless skin, Bangkok Naughty Boo is one of a new generation of influencers in Asia, promising to stay forever young, on trend, and scandal-free because she's computer generated. Blurring the lines between fantasy and reality, these stars are hugely popular with teenagers in the region and will yield increasing power as interest grows in the metaverse, industry experts say. I'm forever non-binary with a dream of becoming a pop star, Bangkok Naughty Boo, who uses they, them pronouns, said in an introductory video sent to the AFP. Created by fashion designer Adisak Jirasakasim and his friends, who envisioned a gender-fluid persona to hang the ideals of the artist community, the character is one of a tribe of made in Thailand virtual influencers born from the pressures of the pandemic. In September, Lin made her debut. She was created after her agency became frustrated by the limitations on human influencers during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Virtual influencers are suitable for the new normal. Artificial intelligence creations are establishing a foothold worldwide in the lucrative influencer market, which is expected to be worth $13.8 billion in 2021, according to data giant Statista. But industry analysts say Asia is where the industry will really boom in the coming decade. We think Asia will be an area of rapid growth in the sector of virtual influencers, and Gen Z is the largest group of internet users in Asia, and it is a digitally adept generation that is highly familiar with social media and all things virtual, explained Nick Bucklanov, a marketing specialist with Hype Auditor. So what's happening here? There's a whole generation of people who are being indoctrinated to follow computer-generated images. Sound familiar, even remotely? Sounds a lot like needing a passport of some kind to go into the store and things of that nature. And so Revelation 13 obviously reminds us there is an image that the whole world is going to bow down and worship and receive the mark as a sign of allegiance to the image, which and all things behind it are obviously based on and through Satan. Now, Breitbart has an interesting story here. The headline reads, Electric Joe Biden promises green U.S. utopia with vehicle chargers for all. As Americans battle soaring gasoline and natural gas prices along skyrocketing heating bills, President Joe Biden wants nobody to worry because on Wednesday, he will unveil his vision for a green electric future. All it requires is billions of taxpayer dollars to fund electric vehicle chargers across the country alongside zero-emissions electric cars and trucks of every size imaginable in 10 to 15 years, perhaps. Biden will visit a General Motors plant in Detroit that manufactures electric vehicles to outline his grand Build Back Better green plan to get drivers out of gasoline-powered cars, according to the AP. He will use the occasion to promise the 7.5 billion in new infrastructure law for electric vehicle chargers will help get America off the sidelines on green energy manufacturing, and repeating a pledge to go electric he made in the 2020 presidential campaign. Now, here's the interesting thing. During the heat wave of the last summer here in California, electric car owners were encouraged by the governor of California not to charge their vehicles as to overload and danger overloading the already weakened system. So, yeah, we're going to have all electric cars. And, just think about California. There's 40 million people that live in California. And California, I think people that come here quickly realize that Californians have a love for their cars. And there are cars all over the road. And of course, the traffic problems here are infamous, I think, around the world. And, so we can't even keep our cars charged or our electricity on, or you're only supposed to do laundry during certain hours of the day because it overloads the system. But in 10 to 15 years, we're going to have 100% electrical vehicles, and everybody will be able to charge their vehicle wherever they go. It's insanity. It's just another empty promise. Now, this, our last story, pairs together with that CNS News because of motivation again. Here we've got, I just paid the other day, it costs $111 to fill up my wife's car, and prices are $5.09 a gallon. And so we've got rising gas prices. What comes in second to rising gas prices? Rising beef prices. And this from CNS News. Beef prices rise 20.1% due to increased consumer demand and labor shortage. Behind unleaded gasoline, beef prices have risen the most on the Consumer Price Index since October of 2020, rising 20.1% in the past year, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the highest single-year increase in beef prices since 2003, when a cow was diagnosed with mad cow disease for the first time in the U.S., which caused a major beef recall. Normally, beef prices fluctuate between 1% and 5% every year, according to the BLS data. But with inflation raising the price of goods and services across the country, why is beef affected significantly more than other meat or animal products? Pork, the closest contender, rose 14.1% over the past year. Dairy-related products saw only a 1.8%. Ron Leminger, professor of animal sciences and beef extension specialist at Purdue University, told CNS News how the current beef market is similar to an hourglass. At the top, we have supply. At the bottom, we have demand. But we have this bottleneck at the packing level and at the processing level, he said. We had a shortage of labor. We had the product. We just couldn't get it through the system. Assistant professor of meat science at the University of Idaho, Phil Bass, pointed to the increased demand for beef during the COVID-19 pandemic as the main source of its price increase, citing how the beef industry had been near harvest capacity for the last 12 months. Bass explained how the pandemic encouraged higher beef consumption. I love this phrase that he used. He said, beef is a celebratory protein. If you're celebrating, you don't say, hey, let's go out and get a chicken breast. People celebrate with steak. And people are trying to treat themselves during the time of uncertainty, and they're treating themselves with beef. Now, obviously, the whole point of our story is the fact that there's going to be not just an increase in price, but there's going to be food shortages during the tribulation. And the only reason I ever bring any of these stories up is because with each tick of the clock, we are growing closer to the rapture of the church, and the tribulation is right behind it. Now, nobody can answer definitively if there's a gap of time between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation. Only stands to reason that there would have to be, because the tribulation begins when the Antichrist rides onto the world scene with a covenant in hand, according to Revelation chapter 6:1, and that's going to take time. So what that span of time is between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation, nobody knows, but I think it's pretty solid that there will be some type of spans of time. Some have speculated some 50 years. I don't think so. When these things begin to come to pass, Jesus said there's a generation that will see all of it. So I don't think 50 years is a candidate. maybe a few months is more likely because the world's going to be in such disarray. That's prime time for somebody to rise to power and say, hey, I've got answers, follow me. So interesting that we're seeing kind of the greasing of the skids, or the precursors, if you will, to so many things that relate to the tribulation period, the rapture of the church that precedes it, or the Ezekiel war scenario, the potential destruction of Damascus and it ceasing from being a city and becoming a ruinous heap, and all the other things we know associated with that. The players are active on the world scene that are going to invade Israel, the economic woes, the cutting off of or the not allowing for the completed Russian pipeline that bypasses Ukraine and their economy and puts money directly in the pocket of the Russians without a middleman or paying any kind of fee to pass through Ukrainian territory or any type of process, and all the other things we see going on in the world today. Energy-related products are on the mind of everybody as gas prices are rising, food prices are rising, inflation is rampant, there's a financial crisis in China, all these things coming together to form a bit of a convergence of prophecy-related events telling us our redemption is nigh. Jesus is coming soon. This is why we can take the Bible's admonitions to not lose heart and to stand fast, having done all to stand. And I think these are important things for us to keep in mind in times such as these. And listen, Jesus is coming, and I think he's coming soon. All the indications regarding Bible prophecy seem to indicate that it is so, perhaps even today. And I've said in the past, I'll remind you again, Jan Markell closes every email or text with that phrase, perhaps today. And today's as good of a candidate as any for that moment, twinkling of an eye experience. So let's keep our heads lifted up, our eyes on the Lord as these things are continuing to unfold around us in an unprecedented scale and speed. So with that said, we'll see you here, there, or in the air. Until next week.